It's the same year that Imam Abu Hanifa passes away. And so you see, Allah, He takes away one great scholar from this nation, but He plants the roots for something else. Imam Shafi was born in Gaza. I see that Allah has placed a light inside you, and don't diminish this light by committing sins. And he stayed there for about 2 years learning about the Hanafi way and the Iraqi way of fiqh. And Ahmad says, this is no ordinary man. He is the greatest scholar here in Makkah right now, and I'm going to go and spend my time with him. Imam Shafi's main work is this. When he read this book, he said that I did not think Allah had created such a man. So after Harun al-Rashid passes away, the new Khalifa, Khalifa al-Ma'mun, he is very, very favorable towards the Mu'tazila.
إنهم فتية آمنوا بربهم وزدناهم هدى.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa ahlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. So alhamdulillah, so far in this sort of series of ours going through the lives of Islamic heroes, great men and women who left behind such a lasting and significant impact in the history of our great nation. We've gone through the lives of some really important rulers like Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih and Sultan Sulaiman I, both of which, expanded Islam to new frontiers, areas that, we never thought Islam would ever reach. Hungary, Vienna, places like this. And maybe because of their efforts, me and you here today are Muslims. And then after that, we looked at from those two stories, we took lessons of leadership and how we can apply them today. But then after that, we moved on to the life of Khalid bin Walid, radiallahu anhu, looking at the lives of military commanders and seeing, the lessons of courage, valor, and discipline that we can take from their lives. But whilst these people, you see, the sort of rulers and the military commanders, whilst they had such a huge impact on our history, there's another group of people that are equally important and a group that we shouldn't forget about. And this is the scholars. There's a very famous saying that they say, the nation that makes a distinction between its warriors and its scholars will have its fighting done by cowards and its thinking done by fools. Meaning that the scholars and the warriors and the leaders, they all played an equally important part in our history. Without one, the other falls. You need both of them to work together. And of all these amazing scholars in our history, there's four main ones that every household, every Muslim household is familiar with. The four famous jurists. Number one, Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, he was titled Imam al-A'zam wa Sirajul A'imma, the greatest of the Imams, and sort of Sirajul A'imma, meaning the path, the beacon that of all scholars, the one that everyone looked up to. And then you had Imam Malik, the Imam of Darul Hijrah, Imam of Medina. And you had Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahimahullah, he was titled Imam of Ahlus Sunnah, just because of how much he did just to preserve Ahlus Sunnah. We'll talk a little bit about some of the struggles that he faced, because Imam Shafi faced the same struggles. But he was given the title Imam of Ahlus Sunnah. And then obviously you have Imam Shafi rahimahullah. And he played a very, very important role in our history, Imam Shafi. He was, and again, we'll talk more about these things, but he was, as my teacher says, someone who created a super madhab. We know all four of the Imams, they created a madhab, but Imam Shafi, he created like a super madhab, combining between all the different schools and their methodologies to create one. And he fought against deviant creeds and did many, many other things during his life. But let's go back right to the start of his life and see how he became who he was. Now, he was born in 150 AH, 150 years after Hijrah, 767 CE. Now, what's amazing about this is that it's the same year that Imam Abu Hanifa passes away. And so you see, Allah, He takes away one great scholar from this nation, but He plants the roots for something else. Just like we spoke about ages ago when we spoke about the rise of the Ottoman Empire. Baghdad fell in 1258. Allah took away a great bastion of Islamic civilization away from us. But at the same time, He planted the roots of revival for the Ottoman Empire. And so the same thing, He took away Abu Hanifa from us, but He gave us someone equally as great, Imam Shafi rahimahullah. Some scholars say that there are some reports that he was born on the same night that Imam Abu Hanifa passes away, but this is a bit more sort of questionable, this narration. Seems like a bit more of a way to sort of exaggerate his birth, but still we know that it was definitely in the same year. And he comes from a very noble lineage, Imam Shafi. That's another really important thing about him. There's two reports. One that he was from the same clan of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And what I mean by clan is, you can imagine the Quraysh is the sort of main tribe. And in that, there's different clans, the Banu Hashim, the Banu Makhzum, the Banu Adi, all these different clans. So some say that he was from the same clan, the Banu Hashim, same clan of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whilst others say he was from like the closest clan to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so like his cousin, his closest cousin. But either way, we know that he is related to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he had a very, very noble lineage, and this is something that plays a key role in his life. And as he grows up, sort of in his infancy, his father passes away. So he's sort of raised without a father, and it's mother who mainly raises him. And now this is an important point that we see in our history. A lot of these scholars, Imam Shafi, Imam Malik, Imam Bukhari, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahimahullah, most of these scholars, you see that their father, he passed away at a very young age, and it's the mothers who raised them. And without them, maybe these great people wouldn't have become so great if it wasn't for the efforts of their mothers. They are the ones who, clothed them, fed them, made sure they were looked after, sent them off to go and study. They made a lot of sacrifice. And we, for example, we know the names of these, all these scholars, Imam Shafi, Imam Ahmad, Imam Bukhari, all these people. But how many of us actually know the names of their mothers? Many of us won't. But these are the unsung heroes of our nation, our mothers especially, that without their efforts, and even today, the scholars, you talk to, your teachers, the mashayikh of today, how many of them would say that they are who they are if it wasn't for the efforts of their mothers? When you go to like a graduation ceremony, a lot of the time, these scholars, the people who are graduating are all thanking their mothers, because it's the efforts of their mothers, especially today as well. Those people who go to study, the mothers are the ones who wake you up every single day, make lunch for you. As soon as you come home, the food is ready for you. Make sure your clothes are washed for you to take into school the next day. It's always our mothers. And obviously our fathers are doing so much as well, working behind the scenes, making sure there's food on the table and things like that. But really our mothers, they are the ones who are pushing us so much. And we see this not just today, but throughout the entirety of Islamic history, this one key theme, that is the mothers. And if you want to actually know more about this, there's a really good series. It's called Builders of a Nation. It's a Ramadan series, 30 episodes that was done, where it goes through all the important women in our history. And throughout the series, we'll also touch on some of these women as well in our history. But the main point here is that the mothers played a very important role, and especially in the life of Imam Shafi, rahimahullah. So Imam Shafi was born in Gaza, today modern-day Palestine, and he obviously grew up without a father. And so when he was about 10 years old, his mother takes him to Mecca, and really it's here where he begins his education. But even before that, he was from a very poor family, Imam Shafi, and we see this also something that's quite common amongst these scholars as well, that they have a very poor upbringing. But in a way, this was something that was good for him, because what this did is he wasn't someone who was very wealthy from the wealthy elite. He was someone that was part of the common people. So now, as a scholar, when he's issuing rulings, when he's giving fatwas, when he's giving verdicts, he understands the plight of the common people. He knows that, I can't give such a harsh ruling because they won't be able to follow it. What's the point? So because he grew up amongst these people, he knew what they could do and what they couldn't do. Whereas now, if he was to grow up as someone who's very wealthy, he wouldn't understand the plight of the common people. So when he gave his fatwas, they wouldn't be able to follow it because he wouldn't understand, be able to contextualize what the common people were going through. So that was one thing. But also, because of the fact that he was quite poor, but he had a very noble lineage, he aspired to achieve something really, really great. He said, I'm from the lineage of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I have to do something that's befitting of this lineage. I have to live up to my name, to the names of my ancestors. I have to achieve something so great so that I'm worthy of having this name and having this lineage and this descent. And so that really pushes him on to achieve all the things he does. And very early on in Mecca, he memorizes the Quran at a very, very young age. And then he begins to memorize hadith. He delves into a lot of hadith, trying to understand them and trying to memorize them. Along with that, he does something else. And this is something really important as well. What he does is he realizes that the Arabic language has started to become polluted, meaning that now the Muslim world is stretching, is very vast, goes from southern France all the way to Central Asia. So you have all these different nationalities and all these different ethnic groups that are mixing with the Arabs. And so the language is becoming polluted with all these other words. Honestly, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it means that pure Arabic is starting to become lost. So what happens is that Imam Shafi, he realizes this, and he says that I need to learn Arabic properly, purely, learn pure Arabic so that I can excel in my studies. And again, so for those people who want to study, one of the first things you'll ever have to do is study Arabic. And it depends on the person. Some people, they don't like it. It gets very challenging, it gets very difficult, especially when having to memorize all the different verbs and things like that. Those who study Arabic, they know memorizing Arabic is very, very difficult. They say perhaps the hardest language in the world to learn. And yes, it's really, really hard. But if you want to study, if you want to take your study seriously, your Islamic studies, one of the main things you'll have to do, one of the first things you'll have to do is study Arabic, because it's the gateway to Islamic knowledge. Nobody's going to translate all the books for you. If you want to really, really understand what the classic scholars, what they wrote, and you want to become a proper student of knowledge, a scholar, you have to start off by getting a mastery of the Arabic language. And that's what Imam Shafi did. And not just any Arabic, but pure Arabic. And this helped him later on, because then he became very, very eloquent, and he was able to write many, many poems. And again, this is something that every student of knowledge, they will know Imam Shafi, they will know his poems. At least they'll have memorized one or two of his poems because of how eloquent they are. And we'll talk a little bit more about his poems later on, inshallah. So he spent these, some time in Mecca learning his sort of, early education. But then he hears about an Imam in Medina. He hears that there's this very, very famous Imam in Medina who everyone looks up to. When he gives a ruling, everyone listens to it. So he hears about him, he hears about his intelligence, and he wants to go and learn with him now. But obviously, you can't just go to a great scholar and say, please, can I learn with you? You have to take something of substance with you, show that you are ready to learn with them. Because they're obviously going to be at a very, very high level. And if you don't understand what they're going to be talking about, you're just wasting your time. So he wanted to, prepare himself to go and study with this Imam. And who is this Imam? This is Imam Malik, rahimahullah. So what he does, he takes two things with him. One is he takes a letter of recommendation from the governor of Mecca. The governor writes saying, this is al-Shafi, Muhammad bin Idris al-Shafi. He studied this much. He's a good student. I think he can study with you. Please take him in. But that's not enough. He also has to take some knowledge with him. So what does he do? He memorizes the entirety of the Muwatta. What's the Muwatta? The Muwatta is Imam Malik's main work, his main sort of writing. This was primarily a hadith collection, one of the first hadith collections in our history. But at the same time, it was also, he had some of Imam Malik's sort of religious rulings and things like that. So it was mainly his work. Now, interestingly, there was a lot of Muwattas written, by the way. It's not just Imam Malik who wrote a Muwatta. Many people wrote a Muwatta. But what happened was, they asked all these Muwattas that were written, they were sort of, nobody knows about them. They all sort of, not vanished, but they all sort of, they never rose to prominence. They declined. They didn't remain, let's say, these Muwattas. So then they asked Imam Malik, why is it that your Muwatta has stayed, but all the other Muwattas, they haven't really remained? What happened? Why is it your book, what's made your book so important? And so this is where he said something very, very famous. He said, what's done for Allah is what remains. Meaning, if your intentions are pure, then Allah will ensure that this is what remains. Now that's why his Muwatta remained, whereas all the other Muwattas today, we don't really know about them. And this Muwatta was so great that the Khalifa at this time, he said, let's hang your Muwatta. He told Imam Malik, he asked him, let's hang your Muwatta on the Kaaba. So every single person will follow this, so that, there's no more difference of opinions. But then Imam Malik said, no, because, there's a possibility I might be wrong. This is not how fiqh works. We don't just say one thing is correct and every other thing is wrong. That's not how fiqh works. That's what he was saying. And because Imam Abu Hanifa, he could be right. Another scholar, he could also be right. So we need to ensure that, we don't make this mistake and say there's only one correct opinion. You don't hang my thing up on my Muwatta up on the Kaaba. So Imam Shafi, he knows about this Muwatta and how great he is. So he memorizes the entire thing. And then he goes to Medina and he tries to seek out Imam Malik. But what happens is he goes there and his assistant turns him away. He says, Imam Malik is busy today. Come back tomorrow. So he comes back tomorrow. And the assistant tells him, come back with whatever you have. Like if you memorize something, if you have a letter, come back with this tomorrow. So he comes back, he gives him the letter of recommendation, and he begins to recite one page of the Muwatta to Imam Malik. And then he stops. And Imam Malik tells him, why did you stop for? Continue. Because what happened was, Imam Shafi had this amazing ability that when he would speak or when he would say something, he would have a very profound impact on the people who are listening to him. And so because of that, Imam Malik wanted him to continue reciting. It's like sometimes you hear someone reciting Quran and they recite a little bit and they stop. Why do you stop? Continue reciting. Because the recitation, it touches the heart. So same thing, his words, just his own words, they were so amazing. They could touch the heart of anyone who was listening to them. And so he told him to continue reciting. And Imam Malik realized that, this is no ordinary person. This young man who's reciting to me, I can see he's destined for great things. And so he told him that sort of, I see that Allah has placed a light inside you, and don't diminish this light by committing sins. And so Imam Shafi, he saw this, wow, this, amazing, the biggest scholar on earth is telling me that I have this ability and this potential. So it inspired him to continue studying and try to achieve great things. And this is something else we see always amongst all the other scholars. Imam Abu Hanifa, for example, he was a trader before he became a scholar. And one day he was walking, and one of the scholars, they stopped him and asked him, who do you refer to when you have a problem about, with your transactions in your fiqh, who do you go to? And he said, I don't really go to anyone. And so he told Imam Abu Hanifa that, I see that there's something inside you, there's some potential inside you. Don't waste it. You can do great things, don't waste it. And so Imam Abu Hanifa, he took that on, and it inspired him to go and achieve great things. So this happened to Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Shafi and all the other scholars. There's always this one moment that somebody gives them a word of encouragement, and now they go on to achieve all these great things. And this is something same that we need to try and apply today, that to encourage people as well. That when you see someone, you see some potential in them, don't dismiss that. Encourage them, give them words of encouragement to try and push them on to achieve great things. Even if it's, regardless of how old they are, if it's someone who is young, if it's someone who is old, if you see that they are good at something, give them some words of encouragement, because you don't know what you can unlock. Imam Malik probably didn't know Imam Shafi was going to become so great, but this one word of encouragement made Imam Shafi one of the greatest scholars on earth that ever walked the face of this earth. Same thing with Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah. So he stays in Medina with Imam Malik, and he studies with him until Imam Malik passes away. But he doesn't just stay in Medina. He goes to nearby towns and studies with the other scholars. And after Imam Malik passes away in around 179 years after Hijrah, he goes to another city in the Arabian Peninsula called Najran. And Najran, it's near Yemen, sort of the southern western part of Arabia. And he works as a judge there. He's appointed as the chief judge of Najran. But the people of Najran, they were known for attempting to try and bribe state officials, judges, and the ministers. They would try and bribe them to gain favor with them. But Imam Shafi, obviously, he's as straight as an arrow. He's not going to take any of these bribes. So when they tried bribing him, he was very, very stern against it. And the governor of Najran, he was also very oppressive. He would oppress the people, abuse his position and power. And Imam Shafi would stand up against him. And so he felt very threatened. He felt that his power is being threatened. The common people felt that, we used to be able to bribe the judges and get what we want. Who is this person who's come here now, this young man? Because Imam Shafi is not very old at this point. Maybe, only about 30 years old. So in their eyes, quite young. And he's been appointed as chief judge. And so they don't know what to do. So what happens here, because of all these trouble that he's causing in their eyes, they start to make up rumors about him, especially the governor. He makes up some rumors about Imam Shafi. See, at this time, the people who are ruling over the Muslim world are the Abbasids. And they come from the family of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, descendants of his uncle Abbas radiallahu anhu. But there's also some other rival families, and especially the Shias. They are trying to gain power and try to overthrow the Abbasids and establish their own dynasty. So because Imam Shafi, he would speak up against whoever it was. He doesn't care if you're an Abbasid, if you're a Shia, if you're whoever you are. If you're doing wrong, he will speak up against it. And because of the fact that he spoke out against a lot of Abbasid ministers because of some oppression that they might have been doing, he had a lot of Shias who had supposedly sympathized with him. That they thought, oh look, Imam Shafi, he speaks up against the Abbasids. Maybe we can use him to support us. So what the governor of Najran, what he did, he used that to his advantage. He manipulated the entire situation, and he wrote to the Khalifa Harun al-Rashid in Baghdad, and he said to him, Shafi, Muhammad bin Idris al-Shafi, he has a lot of Shia supporters, and if you're not careful, this man might rise up and overthrow you. So Harun al-Rashid, the Khalifa, he became, he felt that his power was being threatened. So he ordered for Imam Shafi to be arrested and brought to Baghdad to stand trial for these accusations. But Imam Shafi, obviously, first he's innocent, and Allah won't abandon those people who are innocent, right? It doesn't matter who plots against you, no matter if the entire world plots against you. If you are in the right, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with you. And for us as Muslims, we know that is enough. So long as Allah is with us, even if it's the entire world and you are just one person speaking the truth, and then but Allah is with you, then that's enough for you. And Imam Shafi knew that. So he wasn't afraid. He went to the court right in front of the Khalifa, the most powerful man in the world at this time. His empire stretches from Morocco all the way to Central Asia, right? And he's standing right in front of him. No fear, he's speaking straight to him and saying, no, this is a complete lie. And he's able to sort of argue his case. And at the same time, he receives a testimony from another scholar called Imam Muhammad al-Shaybani. Imam Muhammad al-Shaybani, he is this direct student of Imam Abu Hanifa. So Imam Abu Hanifa was from Kufa in Iraq, and then he had a man called Imam Muhammad al-Shaybani, one of his most senior students. He studies with Imam Abu Hanifa, then he goes to Baghdad, Imam Muhammad, and he begins to teach there. And he was a very, very big scholar there. So Harun al-Rashid, he respected the scholars. So when he heard that Imam Muhammad was, giving testimony for Imam Shafi, he believed Imam Shafi, and he said to Imam Muhammad, take Shafi with you, take Imam Shafi with you, and keep him with you until I give a judgment, I give a verdict about what the situation was. And Imam Shafi was, proven to be innocent. But then, actually, there is some good in this. Because now we might think, oh, look, he's been taken as a prisoner and he's having to go through these difficulties. But we know that in every difficulty, Allah places some khair, Allah places some good in this. And He tells us in the Quran that it may be that you dislike something, but there is good in it for you. Imam Shafi, he likes being imprisoned and being taken to the Khalifa and having to answer for crimes that you didn't commit. But Allah placed some good in this. Because what happened was, this allowed him to study with Imam Muhammad, one of the other main scholars in the world at that time. And Imam Malik in Medina, and now you had Imam Muhammad in Baghdad, and he managed to go and study with Imam Muhammad in Baghdad. And he stayed there for about 2 years learning about the Hanafi way and the Iraqi way of fiqh. So what happened in this time in the world right now, when it comes to Islamic law, when it comes to fiqh, there was sort of different main groups in terms of the way they approached Islamic law, how they understood it, how they took rulings from the Quran and Sunnah. Now the people of Medina, they took a certain approach. You had the people of Kufa, the people of Iraq, Baghdad, they took a certain approach. So first he went and he studied in Mecca, he understood their approach. Then he went to Medina, he studied and learned their approach with Imam Malik. Now he's gone to Iraq, to Kufa, to Baghdad, and he's learned their approach. So now you can see how he's sort of become, and I was saying at the beginning, as my teacher says, a super madhab. He combined between all of them. And so in 2 years, staying and learning with Imam Muhammad, he goes back to Mecca, where it all began, back to his roots. And for a long time, he stays there and he begins to teach in Mecca. And this is really where he combines between all these different schools and now gives his thoughts, basically. Now, this is what I think, combining between them, Medina, the Madani school, and the Kufan school, all of these schools. And now this is the way I approach fiqh, Imam Shafi, rahimahullah, combining between everything. And he stayed there and he taught loads of people. But at the same time, it wasn't just the people of Mecca he taught. Mecca is, we know what it's famous for, right? Hajj. And so during the season of Hajj, scholars from all over the world would come to perform Hajj. And when they were there, who would they look for? They would look for one man, Imam Shafi. And again, he's not very old at this time. We know that he's about maybe, in his early 40s, around that time. Not too old at this time, by the way, still very, very young. And all the scholars around the world, they would come to study with him. For example, one was Imam Ahmad. Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, rahimahullah, he goes to go and study with Imam Shafi. He goes for Hajj, he sits with other scholars, and then he hears about Imam Shafi, so he goes and studies with Imam Shafi. And the other senior scholars say, why are you going to this young man for? Like, there's all these other great scholars who come for Hajj. Why are you going to this young scholar for? And Ahmad says, this is no ordinary man. He is the greatest scholar here in Makkah right now, and I'm going to go and spend my time with him. And so Imam Ahmad goes and studies with Imam Shafi when he is in Makkah. And the other important part in Makkah is that he doesn't get involved in politics. Whereas in Najran, he was appointed as the chief judge. Here, he stays away from all these positions of governance and, in courts and things like that. So what this allows him to do is it gives him a lot of freedom. So he uses this time to just dedicate himself to developing fiqh, to writing works, and to teaching people. And really here, this is where he begins to develop and give his own sort of contribution to the field of usul al-fiqh. Usul al-fiqh is basically, it's the sort of the principles that we use to try and derive rulings from the Quran and Sunnah. So imagine you have the sources, the Quran and Sunnah, and then you have the ruling. But how do you get that ruling from the Quran and Sunnah? Sort of use usul al-fiqh. It's the process that you're going through to try and derive these rulings. So he is one of them, the first figures to try to give some sort of contribution to the realm of usul al-fiqh. And so it's here in Mecca where he begins to develop his ideas. But then after staying there for a while, he goes and he travels to Baghdad. He returns to Baghdad, and he begins to teach there. So now he's no longer like a student of Imam Muhammad or someone who's taken as a prisoner. He's gone there of his own will to go and teach there. Now, why Baghdad? Because Baghdad is the capital of the Muslim world. If you want to obviously teach and disseminate knowledge, you have to be in Baghdad, because that's where everyone will come. Not Mecca, not Medina, it's Baghdad. That's the main, the hub of knowledge, the center of the world. So he went there to teach. And this is where he writes his main book, the Risala. The Risala is Imam Shafi's sort of his main, just like we said, for example, Imam Ghazali, his main work is the Ihya Ulumuddin. Imam Shafi's main work is this, the Risala. And it's sort of the first book, the first main writing on Usul Fiqh, Imam Shafi's Risala. And so some of the scholars, they read it. One of the scholars, Abdurrahman ibn Mahdi, rahimahullah, when he read this book, the Risala, he said that I did not think Allah had created such a man. This book is so great that I didn't think it would be possible for Allah, not possible, sorry, but I didn't think such a man had walked on the earth yet, that such a man had been created, because this book was so amazing and it was so revolutionary when it came to the realm of fiqh. And so he stays in Baghdad for a while. And also another important point that in Baghdad, quite interestingly, is the main masjid, there were different halaqas, so there were different circles. You had a circle here, a few people were studying with the scholar, another circle there, a few people were studying with the scholar. And you see the same thing today when you go to the Muslim world in your masjids, you will see that there are different circles. The scholar, a few people sitting here, with the scholar, a few people sitting there. And the same thing used to happen in the grand masjid in Baghdad. But when Imam Shafi started teaching in Baghdad, his circle became so big that no other circle take place in Baghdad at the same time. Meaning there were so many people that would flock to his circle that every other circle, they had to stop doing it because there was no space for them. Everyone wanted to go to Imam Shafi, again, because of how much knowledge he had and how, how intelligent he was. But then at the same time, something happened in the Muslim world. A dark period in the Muslim world started to take place. And this was the rise of a deviant creed called the Mu'tazila. So Mu'tazila were one of the first deviant creeds in Islamic history. What they believed was, they to summarize their ideas, Shaykh Abul Hasan al-Nadwi, a very famous thinker from the 20th century, he puts it very, very beautifully that the Mu'tazila, what they believed, they basically took rationalism, thinking, to the absolute extreme. Too much thinking, to the point where Shaykh Abul Hasan al-Nadwi says, whilst Ahlul Sunnah, the three schools of Aqeedah in Ahlul Sunnah, whilst they believe that our rationalism, our thinking has to fall in line with what Allah said in the Quran and Sunnah. It has to fall in line with that. The Mu'tazila, they believe the opposite. They said that the Quran and Sunnah has to fall in line with what we think. And so they started to have all these sort of deviant ideas, such as believing that the Quran had been created and things like that. And they rose to prominence a long time before Imam Shafi, even during the time of Imam Abu Hanifa, they took hold. But it was really during this time of Shafi and Imam Ahmad that they rose to prominence. And Imam Shafi would regularly debate with these people to try and stop their ideas, people from accepting their ideas. But what had happened is that these people, they managed to get into the court. They managed to wriggle into the positions of power and influence in the Abbasid court. So they were very close to the Khalifa, they were very close to the ministers, and they began making them believe in their ideas. So after Harun al-Rashid passes away, the new Khalifa, Khalifa al-Ma'mun, he is very, very favorable towards the Mu'tazila. And he launches something called the Mihna. The Mihna, what it does, what this period was, the Mihna, you can say the Inquisitions in English. What happened here is he was trying to force the scholars to accept this Mu'tazila, the creed of the Mu'tazila, try and make sure that everyone is believing in this. The Muslim world tried to make every single person accept this idea and make that the main creed that everyone follows. But obviously, the scholars of Ahlul Sunnah, they wouldn't just sit by and let these deviant ideas take over. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will always support those people who are on the truth. And so Ahlul Sunnah, the scholars of Ahlul Sunnah, they got together and they intellectually battled against these Mu'tazila, the people who followed this. And still, even after Imam Shafi, many decades after he passed away, many decades after Imam Ahmad passed away, the Mu'tazila were eventually put down, but it took a very, very long time. Scholars, Imam Ahmad, for example, who was imprisoned and he was beaten very severely and tortured very severely in prison just because of the fact that he didn't accept the Mu'tazila creed. Many other scholars were killed during this period. And so, going back to Imam Shafi and this Mu'tazila, that period, because they started to take root and the Khalifa himself was a proponent of this Mu'tazila creed, Imam Shafi realized that I can't stay in Baghdad anymore. If I want to work and do what I want to do, I can't stay in Baghdad because we're going to be persecuted. We have to leave this area. So now he goes to Egypt. And this is sort of the final destination he goes and travels to Egypt in around 814 CE, about 198 years after Hijrah. He goes to Egypt. And when he goes there, he sort of an important thing that happens here is he begins to revise many of his ideas. Many of the opinions he had, he begins to change them. And what this does is it creates sort of two versions, you can say, two different versions of the Shafi'i school. You have the old madhab and you have the new madhab. The old madhab is all of Imam Shafi'i's ideas prior to going to Egypt. When he goes to Egypt, he starts to change a lot of his opinions. And so here we get the new madhab, the madhab al-jadid, the new sort of madhab of Imam Shafi. So he's sort of the only one that has these two distinct type of madhabs because of what happened after he travels to Egypt. And he spends sort of the rest of his life studying and teaching in Egypt. And now, one of the scholars who wrote about Imam Shafi, he says that there were sort of three key qualities that I really want to zone in on when it comes to the life of Imam Shafi. And number one was that he was very quick-witted and eloquent. And really, it's these three qualities that allowed him to achieve what he did. And that's what sort of the scholar is arguing. Number one is that he was very quick-witted and very eloquent. Meaning that when, number one, if we deal with quick-witted, when it comes to debating, he was very intelligent when it comes to debating. It was very difficult to defeat Imam Shafi in a debate. You might think that, I've managed to get a one-up on him. I've got a point that Imam Shafi definitely cannot rebuke. But he finds a way to try, he finds a rebuttal against this, because he was very quick-witted. He was also very eloquent. And like we were saying before, the people who would speak to, he had a very profound impact on them. You wanted to be with Imam Shafi, you wanted to listen to him. Everything he said, it was gems, anything that he was saying in his classes, when he was teaching, all his writings. Even today, if you go and read some of his poems, every student of knowledge, they will at one point spend some time studying the poems of Imam Shafi because of how much eloquence, how many lessons you can take just from his poems. So that was the first sort of main quality he had. He was very quick-witted and very eloquent. The other thing was he had a lot of foresight, and he had a lot of foresight in the sense that when it came to speaking to people, he was able to deal with them at their level, and that's why everyone wanted to study with Imam Shafi. You could be an average scholar, or you could be a very big scholar, very intelligent, but you could still come and take benefit from Imam Shafi. He was able to teach in a way that even those people who weren't very learned could take benefit, and those people who were very learned could take benefit. And that's why, again, going back to his writings, anyone can read his writings and take benefit from it. Even in English, the translations don't do it justice, but you can still take benefit from it. Even if you're not a student, you need to engage with the Risala and things like this, but you can engage with his works on spirituality and take motivation and take benefit from that. And so that really allowed him to gain a huge audience. And I guess this is one thing that some of us, another lesson that we can take from that when we speak to people, speak to them at their level. Meaning somebody who's not very, might not be a scholar, you don't treat them like a scholar and start giving them big advice. Sometimes we fall into this trap of we've learned a bit, students of knowledge. We fall into this trap so much that as soon as we begin studying, we start using all these big Arabic words and stuff. And now you're going and speaking to a normal person, a teenager or a child. And now you're speaking to him using all these big words and yani after every couple words. What benefit will this person take if you start doing this, right? So learn from Imam Shafi, he would be able to relate to everyone. So same thing, when you begin studying in your pursuit of knowledge, if someone isn't very learned, speak to them at their level. MashaAllah, you've got some knowledge now, but then that's reserved for the classroom and for the other students. But for the layman, for the normal person, you still treat them at their level. Just think about that. If you are a student who's learned a bit, Imam Shafi is someone who's learned so much, but still he was able to relate to the ordinary person, the common man. So that was the second one. Number one was he was very quick-witted, very eloquent. The second one, he has a lot of foresight and was able to relate to everyone. He was very, very courageous. That his ability to speak out against the truth, once it got him, in a lot of trouble with the Mu'tazila, it got him in a lot of trouble because of what happened at Najran. But he still didn't give up on his principles. Whatever he believed in, to the end, regardless of what might happen to him, for him, his principles, his ideals, the Islamic principles were all so much bigger than him, than his life. So he was never ever afraid. He was very courageous and very, very sort of well-principled. Never feared to speak out the truth, even to those people in power above him. And now, another really important thing about Imam Shafi, a lesson that we can all take from this, and this is very famous, as sort of advice that was given to him. One of the main lessons we take from Imam Shafi's life is the advice someone else gave to him. And what happened one day is, see, Imam Shafi, he had a photographic memory. He saw something and he would be able to remember it straight away. That was Imam Shafi because of his photographic memory. And one day he went to his teacher and he wasn't able to learn. He complained. He's like, no, I can't learn. What's happened? He was trying so hard to learn something, but he wasn't able to do it. So he complained to his teacher he said, my memory has become so weak today. And so this is where his teacher gave him a very, very famous piece of advice. Waqi' was the name of his teacher. And he gave him a very, very famous piece of advice. He said that, he complained to his teacher about the weakness of his memory. And so Waqi' said to him, abandon sin, because knowledge is a light from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the light of Allah is not given to a sinner. A very, very famous piece of advice. That he told Imam Shafi, stay away from sin. Because this knowledge is something that is very, very sacred, very, very precious. Understand it this way, that your heart is like a vessel, right? And the knowledge has to enter your vessel. But the knowledge is a light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah's light cannot enter into a dirty and corrupt vessel. So you have to purify yourself. You have to stay away from sin if you want to learn about the religion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The two cannot coexist together in your heart. You can't be sinning and trying to study at the same time. You might be learning a few things, but that knowledge will not benefit you in any way. So this advice from Imam Shafi's teacher Waqi' to him, perhaps the most important thing we can take from today, and for anyone who wants to study, something that you should be ingrained in your head, that if you want to study, stay away from sin, because knowledge is a light, and the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not given to a sinner. And so that was sort of the life and legacy of Imam Shafi rahimahullah. And following this, following this sort of advice, he took this advice on. Then this was given to him at a very, very sort of early stage in his education, and that inspired him to go and study and learn so much and disseminate all the knowledge that he did learn. And then after staying in Egypt for a few years, in 204 years after Hijrah, around 820 CE, Imam Shafi passes away, leaving this world. But Imam Shafi, even though he left this world, and think about it, he left this world nearly, over 1,000 years ago, now coming up to maybe 1,200 years ago, he left this world. But there are still millions of people all around the world who follow Imam Shafi. And go back to what Imam Malik said at the beginning, what's done for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what remains. He was a man who dedicated his entire life to the pursuit of knowledge. He gave up his sleep, he gave up wealth. He could have had so much, if he wanted, he could have taken that position as a chief judge in any city and make a lot of money. But he gave all that up because he understood that we have a greater duty in this world. And it's not to make money, it's not to aspire for high positions, but it's to learn the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to go and disseminate that amongst the masses. And because of all the efforts that he left behind, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has accepted his efforts. And that's why till to this day, there isn't a single household, a Muslim household, that will not know the name of Imam Shafi rahimahullah. He combined between all these different schools of thought and gave something new. And that was then used to, and even to, Western universities, when they study law, they will refer back to Imam Shafi's Risala. When we were studying, took some modules in law in university, a lot of the times they go back to Imam Shafi's Risala and the sort of foundations he laid there for legal thinking, because of how revolutionary it was and the way he sort of worded things and the way he sort of presented his research and his findings. And so there are, like we said, so many lessons you can take from the life of Imam Shafi, especially for the one who wants to go and study the deen. Imam Shafi should be someone who you use as a role model, as an inspiration. And just like we said right at the beginning when we started off, just like the warriors and the leaders are so important in our history, don't underestimate the role of the scholars and the students of knowledge. The warriors will go and conquer the lands, but who will then make, the population, who will make them learned, who will make them intelligent, who will take care of them? It is the works of the scholars. And behind every scholar, like we said at the beginning also, is the tireless work of our mothers. And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept the work of all the scholars in our history and allow us to follow in their footsteps, accept the work of all those behind the scholars, the mothers, the fathers, who work so tirelessly to try and create these amazing scholars. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept all their efforts. Thank you very much. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept it from us. Subhanakallah wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.